This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Cosmographia podcast. I am Russ. This is my brother Kyle.
Yep.
We are hosts, resident tech support experts, recording guys. And we're also joined by Bradley.
I'm here, man.
Yeah. Bradley is Randall's longtime traveling companion and video documenter. He runs GeoCosmicReX.
Research associate.
Yeah. And Mike doesn't really belong here, but we're letting him stay anyway. What's that, Mike?
No, Mike and I we go back about as long as Brad and I go back, and we met because we built a garage studio for Mike years ago. And when we were doing the Zoom conferences leading up to the Colorado trip, we were over there at Mike's studio. Mike is a retired, what would you call yourself? What did you call yourself, Mike, when you were
a recovering journalist?
A recovering journalist, yeah. So he's here helping us basically archive all this for history. And he's also documenting our current project that we're doing, which is pretty awesome. And maybe at some point we'll share some little bits and pieces of what's going on my day job.
He also has a really nice studio that you used during the Zoom conferences leading up to the Colorado trip.
Yeah, that's
what I mentioned, but
I think Mike has been kicked out of his own studio.
Yeah, it looks like he's been kicked out of his nice studio.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to broach that question there.
Well, it's just a mess. Since I blew up my computer, the place is littered with computer parts.
Oh yeah,
on my half of the room. So I've just come into here to a corner in my son's former room.
That works.
Yep.
Yeah. So Cosmographia, just to let everybody know, is kind of an ongoing conversation. So you can come in and listen to any episode you want, but your best bet is to start at the beginning because we are always touching on subjects that we talked about in previous episodes. So
yeah, you might think of it as an extended conversation.
Right.
And exactly. We might go through 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 episodes where we're basically addressing the same theme. And not always, but generally I like to start by introducing some of the more fundamental material and then get deeper into the specifics as we go along. So it definitely helps if you go to the beginning of it and start listening to it through, just in the same way as if you were going to read a book. Rather than jumping around from chapter to chapter, start with chapter 1.
Right.
And then, of course, we will segue into new subject matter. So, you can jump in on those episodes, and we'll, in the synopsis of each episode, we can put a little flag or an indicator that we're kind of maybe launching out on a new direction, or there's a new, because like we talked about, how many episodes was our focus, the discussion of Atlantis? 5 or 6 episodes, right?
Something like that, 6.
Something like that, yeah. And now we're kind of, even though this is related material and relevant for understanding the big picture, we've kind of segued off into another direction now when talking about the mass extinction of the megafauna. So that was mostly what we were talking about last week. And that, of course, is relevant because this is something that was going on at the same time as all of this stuff we've been talking about for the last 6 episodes.
That's right.
Then hopefully in the future, it's going to be easier to sort them out because we're going to have a number for the sequential podcast, but we're also going to have a number for the group of Atlantis directed conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
So where it may seem strange right now as they're being numbered, in the future, once they're all done, it is hopefully going to make more sense.
It makes sense, yeah. It's episode 6, Atlantis Part 4. It'll make
as they come out now, and people that are fortunate enough to be in on it as it's happening, awesome. But it looks kind of funky.
Yeah. Yeah, and one other thing I was going to say before we get started is this is episode 13, and it's Halloween season, so hopefully nothing explodes. No one dies.
Yeah, we're actually one day now out of it. The Day of the Dead celebration was always generally 3 days, and All Hallows Eve, October 31st was the eve of this 3-day celebration of the dead and of the ancestors and so on. So that was, pretty much practiced all over the world in ancient times.
And in the Catholic Church, November 1st was All Saints' Day.
All Saints' Day.
November 2nd is All Souls' Day.
Right.
So yes, we're out of the Halloween festival.
We're out of that. And basically, we've now passed through the densest part of the Torrid stream. So it kind of fits that, that we're in that Day of the Dead mindset during basically those few days when we're passing through the densest part of the
also
stream.
doing episode 13.
That's what I was saying.
I'm trying to say.
One more transverse of the meteor stream that we've survived. So yeah, we got through it.
Randall, without going into the full Halloween spiel that we did a video for. By the way, George Howard plugged the Halloween video on his page.
On the Cosmic Tusk, he did. Yep.
Yeah, on the Cosmic Tusk. So just briefly, though, explain to people who haven't seen that video and plug the video why the Halloween references matter, cosmically speaking.
Well, because they're associated temporally with the Torrid meteor stream, which the Earth crosses twice each year. And so that's going to be a subject of a future conversation that we will explore in great detail. But the idea is that the Earth crosses that stream twice each year, once in late October, early November, as the material is coming in from near the Jupiter or Jovian orbit, and then the second time in late summer when the material has made its transit around the sun and is now heading back out to the Jovian orbit. We cross the stream twice. And so the idea is that Earth may have encountered the disintegrating byproducts of the Torrid meteor system on more than one occasion, maybe multiple occasions. And so it gets into this whole Day of the Dead tradition that's also associated with the destruction of the world through flood. So a lot of the flood myths are associated and have their roots in this Day of the Dead tradition. So it's a really interesting stuff. We will definitely get into exploring the Torrid meteor stream in great detail. Yeah, because it's important that people understand that and its potential role in Earth history, its potential role in the events of the Younger Dryas, and the mass extinction that we're actually talking about right now, the megafaunal extinctions. All of these things are interconnected.
And then also, Randall, the culmination of the Pleiades directly overhead and their position as the shoulder of the bull and all the different places that those get pulled in. So, yeah, it's a very complex and fascinating story.
And as a viewer of this podcast, if you want more detail, go to the GeoCosmicRex video page and look up Randall's Halloween video. It's really interesting. Gives a lot of insight as to why universally, worldwide, this time of year is sacred to the dead.
It's the cosmic origins of Halloween, I believe is the title. Cosmic Origins of Halloween.
It's about 25 minutes long, and it's worth watching.
Yeah. The idea that this is a carrying forward of an ancient memory of the day that everything died, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
And what we get into in that 20 minutes, of course, is only cursory. I mean, we could spend easily a couple of 2-hour episodes covering that in detail, and then we probably will.
Yes.
Because it touches upon the Taurids, but there's a lot more that needs to be explored there. And again, because it's part of this whole grand mystery that we're exploring here, we have to look at it at some point in great detail.
Yep. And as a preview, just throw that in there. That is the first couple of Cosmography 101 classes that are on the GeoCosmicRex channel.
Good.
So yeah, I think it's 4, 5, and 6. The first couple lectures were right at Halloween, so they can get a preview.
Cool. Mm-hmm. One other thing I wanted to say before we get started is about the length. So we have a goal of 1 hour per podcast, and that's because we have an infinite number of podcasts in the future. So the idea is to just do this for an hour, and we usually go to an hour and a half or 2. We've never been able to actually keep it down to 1 hour, but that's the goal, is 1 hour per podcast.
Let's not burn everybody out.
Right. So
right, we want these to be digestible chunks here. Let's not overeat. And yeah, so I know that some people are sort of complaining a bit that it stopped too soon, but bear in mind there will quickly be another chapter or episode posted that picks it right up and carries it on.
Exactly.
And, like you said, we have potentially an infinite number of podcasts here.
Right.
At the rate that technology is advancing, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you to all of you who said that you would love to have much longer ones, but our goal is to keep them to an hour-ish because we are going to keep posting them. So we appreciate that all of you say you would sit down and watch us for 4 hours, but we can't do that once a week. Yeah.
Yeah, we realize the fans that are here and want to see the video immediately. We love that. But again, if it's a year from now, somebody that's just learning about Randall can go back and then they can binge on 10 episodes in a row, and they will get that. You get as much as they want all at once. But right now, as they're coming out new, we're trying to keep up.
Right.
That is what is colloquially known as all the Randall you can handle.
That's right. A year from now, you will have 52 freaking hours of podcasts to watch. So don't worry about how they're being.
That's right. Take a break for the winter and come back in the spring and binge out.
All right. So where were we, Randall? Let's.
We were talking about again this most recent mass extinction in Earth history, which was the demise of the great megafauna. And depending on how you divide up the number of species worldwide, we basically are seeing at least 100, maybe up to 120, again, depending on exactly where your taxonomic division occurs. But essentially, we see about half of the species globally that are more than 100 pounds body weight, which is sort of the cutoff is actually 44 kilograms, which is very close to 100 pounds. Above that is considered megafauna, right? So what we're seeing is a loss of megafaunal species that was close to half of the number of species globally. So what remains in the aftermath of those events at the end of the last ice age, at the termination of the Pleistocene epoch and the onset of the Holocene post-glacial epoch, saw an extinction of mammalian species whose numbers would have exceeded or been at least as equal to what we see in the world today. In other words, here, let me put it to you this way. If we were to lose 100 to 120 species of megafauna today, that's pretty much all the megafauna. That's pretty much every species of megafauna, on every continent, including Africa, the subcontinent of India, North America. Yeah, you start naming them, the lions and tigers and bears and caribou and coyotes and wildebeests and giraffes, and you start making a list, right? You're going to get about 120 roughly species. Again, how do you divide it? It can sometimes make more species or sometimes less species. But basically, the idea is
megafauna only mammals, or does it count any animal over, like a crocodile? Is that?
Fauna. Yeah, so it could be a crocodile.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
It could be a crocodile or an alligator. But generally, the extinction was exclusively limited to mammals for the most part.
Interesting.
For the most part. There were a few exceptions, but because there were bird species that went extinct as well. I'm not as well informed on the specific species of birds that went extinct as mammals. My interest has been more in mammals, but really need to look at that too, because each one of these provides clues to understanding what actually happened.
Right.
Because even if we accept the role of an impact, there's still a lot between, okay, there was an impact of something from space, 30 or 40 million animals disappeared from the planet, but what happened specifically in between there is still pretty vague. Those specific steps, the details are what matter. As it's been said, the devil is in the details. But to set this into context, to get the scale or magnitude of this mass extinction, you have to think of this: the loss of animals, if replicated today, would essentially leave us with no mega-mammals.
Yeah.
Basically half of the megafaunal species on Earth disappeared within a couple of thousand years. So what happened? And it's still, it hasn't been figured out. But I think we're a lot closer now that we're willing to open to the possibility that there was something extraterrestrial involved, like an impact, because you can see where the dead end was in the previous thinking, where human predation was considered to be the predominant agency for the extinction, which as we begin to break this apart and we look at the specifics of the extinction, human predation certainly was a factor. I'm not dismissing it. It was a factor, but it was a minor factor, and it's not the factor that led to the actual extinction. Now, post-extinction, there were residual survivors that remained. The pygmy mammoths on Wrangel Island is a good example. Now, if you have small pockets of survivors, now in that case, maybe you could say that humans provided the final nail in the coffin. I don't totally dismiss that idea, but essentially the collapse of species, at roughly 12 to 13,000 years ago, had very little to do with humans.
Yeah, it wouldn't be considered overhunting if there was only a few left and you killed them while hunting.
Right.
Yeah.
In a very insular, limited environment too. You have to keep that in mind.
It seems to me that any species of animal that is killed off by human activity was already going extinct. Otherwise, right?
Yes, that would be my point. Would be my point. And so I don't say that humans didn't play a role,
right?
But they weren't the dominant role. They weren't the thing that set the ball in motion. It took something a lot bigger than tribes of a few dozen hunters with spears to cause the mass extermination worldwide. And certainly, what we begin to the information and the research and the documentation we begin to introduce in the last episode, you can see it is totally inconsistent with the idea of human overkill. You start talking about the numbers of mammoth remains being dredged up out of the Siberian permafrost and being washed up out of the Arctic Ocean, and when you see those thousands upon thousands of tusks going to the world ivory market back in the 19th century that are being excavated from the frozen permafrost, that's not humans. That's not a small band of human hunters, literally decimating thousands of mammoths and leaving their carcasses there on the permafrost as they're, sweeping across the Bering Land Bridge down into
all nicely piled up in a garbage dump.
Yeah. So, that's
dudes and spears and butt flaps did not kill thousands of mammoths all in the same place, right?
Precisely what I was about to say. But nonetheless, check this out, because this really captures it here, which kind of shows the paradigm that there are actually people that do now believe that this constitutes the major agency of extinction. Yeah. Now, did this happen? It probably did. Although, considering the various fauna that was available, I don't know what the really big incentive would be to go after the most dangerous animal to take down. At the very top of the food chain. There might be an occasion that you would want a mammoth, but there was a lot of small game, and we know from looking at the cultural sites of the Clovis that they were hunting and eating small game. They were fishing, they were hunting and gathering, and this constituted the bulk of their diet was small game, fishing, and hunting and gathering. Right?
Yeah.
And so, there was a study done by a Russian scientist I read years ago, and I just remembered it because he was trying to calculate, and of course his numbers were wildly conservative, But what he was trying to do was calculate how much mammoth meat the Pleistocene hunters had to eat in order to essentially eat the species to extinction. And
I love Russian scientists.
What incentive would these hunters have to basically bring down an elephant if you weren't eating it, if you weren't eating the meat? So, really,
trophies or something like that, the tusks, bones for materials, but
could be some coming of age, like that proves you're the most badass warrior.
That's more like one.
Yeah.
Every now and again.
Yeah.
Not all the time.
Exactly. So yeah, the whole notion to me of human predation seemed silly even from the beginning. Instinctively, it just didn't make sense to me. And then as I went in and learned more and more about the taphonomic circumstances, and let me define that term because that's going to be a very useful term that we use. Taphonomy is the study of what happens to the carcass of, say, in this case, an animal at the time of its death and the time it becomes part of the fossil record.
Oh, yes.
There are a number of routes that can lead from the death of the individual and its interment into the fossil record. And that process in there is the science of taphonomy. So when I talk about the taphonomic circumstances, I'm talking about, for example, might be a woolly mammoth that's flash frozen. And we're going to be looking at that a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Or it might be, a disarticulated carcass found frozen in the permafrost. How did that get there? Now, that might be different than an animal basically dying in the ocean and sinking to the bottom and then, being preserved because of anoxic conditions. Now, anoxic simply means without oxygen.
No oxygen.
In order to preserve these carcasses, you have to essentially remove the oxygen from the environment because otherwise they quickly disappear. I've got some interesting studies that were done back in the 80s and early 90s when biologists were studying the mass African elephant mortality that resulted basically from two things: from poaching, which once automatic weapons were introduced into Africa, poaching numbers went way up, and then you also had extensive droughts in sub-Saharan Africa in the 1980s, and so you had mass deaths of elephants around watering holes, and then also with the actual cases of human predation, where all they were after was the tusks, you had carcasses of elephants left just lying on the landscape with their tusks removed. But here, the taphonomic studies were interesting because what they showed is even a huge elephant carcass oftentimes was basically gone within 5 years. And as a result of bacterial disintegration of scavengers, all of that. Essentially, within 5 years, a lot of these times, these elephant carcasses were gone. They don't just lay there on the landscape and become part of the fossil record. They have to be quickly buried. They have to quickly be removed from those processes that would ordinarily recycle that carcass. And so now you come to the situation you have to address is how do you quickly remove these carcasses from the factors that would cause it to be recycled. Think about that. I think we mentioned this last week, the number of American bison that were basically left to rot on the prairies. We don't find their fossilized remains,
right.
So that's the normal course of things. Fossilization is not really the normal course of things.
Very abnormal. Yeah, it is. Extreme circumstances require fossilization.
Yeah. So anyways, we are, my point is that if we wanted to affect a mass extinction today that was equivalent to the mass extinction at the end of the Ice Age, we would basically have to exterminate every animal on Earth over 100 pounds in body weight. And that's not too much of an exaggeration. So anyways, we don't want that to happen again.
That's right.
And the claim is now being made that we are in the midst of the 6th great mass extinction, right? And this is referencing the great 5 in Earth history. And I'm sure that, Kyle, you can quickly name the great 5.
Nope.
Okay, so this is some
Permian Extinction was
that was number 3.
number 3.
And that was the granddaddy of all of them.
Yep.
That was 90 to 95% of all species. Actually, the earliest was the terminal Ordovician, but it really wasn't the oldest. There's at least one huge extinction that occurred in the Cambrian, but it's less known than these other 5. And then the Permian, the Ordovician was then followed by the late Devonian, which was roughly 360 million years ago. And then that was followed by the Permian Triassic, which was the really big one. And it's now dated to about 251 million years ago. And then following that was the Triassic Jurassic, and that was what opened the door to the ascent of the dinosaurs.
Right.
That was about 144 million years ago. And then
there's Cretaceous Tertiary.
Then there was the Cretaceous. And then the Cretaceous was really the dominance of the dinosaurs. And actually back up the Triassic Jurassic, I misspoke. It was about 214 million years ago. Then the cusp of the Triassic or the Jurassic Cretaceous was about 144 million years ago. And then, of course, the Cretaceous came to an abrupt end at about 66 million years ago, and that was the last of the Great 5 that basically took out the dinosaurs. So these were the Great 5. And I am writing a series of articles, essays, whatever you want to call them right now about the specifics that we now know about the nature of those events. And they were truly extraordinary. And they were really times of major upheaval, catastrophic upheaval on a global scale that would, easily terminate the human species were something like that to occur again. Unless of course, we had colonies in space. That would be the one way. That would be the only way we would survive events on that scale. Now, I'm not saying we'd be expecting any event on that scale, although it could happen. That's the point. And we're just beginning to figure out the probabilities here. You can make assumptions that lead to probabilistic assumptions, conclusions rather. But the more we know, the more we learn, the more it becomes apparent to us that these kinds of events, not necessarily the planetary killer events that have triggered the Great 5, but events that certainly could cause the collapse of civilization are way, way more frequent than anybody was even imagining a generation or two ago. And that is a critical insight here. That's a critical awareness that we need to come to terms with. And then when you couple that with the fact that we look back over the last 250,000 years of Earth history, and we find that periods of relative climate warmth and stability, such as we have enjoyed during the Holocene, are actually the exception. And the longest that we've now seen in the last, say, 250,000 years is the so-called Eemian period, which we've essentially already exceeded that. And the Eemian period itself, which was previously assumed to have been an equivalent period of stability to the Holocene, has already discovered that there were several very prominent discontinuities within the Eemian, right? Which was from, I think, 105 to about 125, 125,000 years ago. From about 105,000 to 125,000, just roughly. So give somebody a comparison. But even within the Eemian, there was major spikes that, if equivalent today, would put major stress on civilization, major stress. And so we're really, it seems like we've led a charmed life for a few millennium here. And there's no guarantee that this is going to continue on. Yeah. And that's why I get so frustrated when all of the discussion about global change and climate change is all focused on carbon dioxide, to the exclusion of other factors that we know without any doubt whatsoever have been major players in triggering global change. we're going to be talking about volcanism here and the role that these great volcanic events have had in Earth history. In the last one, we'll talk about Tambora, which occurred in 1815, and how that yet led to a year without a summer in 1816, when, celebrants of July 4th in New England were having to wear overcoats because it was a snowstorm in New England on July 4th, the year without a summer, and it was repeated crop failures. There was one scholar who referred to it as the last great subsistence crisis in Western civilization. Now, what would happen with a repeat of Tambora? We would come through that much better than people did in 1816, but it would still be a major stress. What we would see is that there would be very large crop failures. And what that would lead to is temporary, very large spikes in the cost of food. Primarily, that would be the first place we would hit, is agricultural products would go way up in price if we had an equivalent year, let's say, to 1816, because there would be repeated crop failures, right? And in the poorer communities, there would be serious consequences. Particularly, as long as we have an advanced industrial civilization, and we keep intact our trade networks and so forth, some areas that are harder hit than other areas have a network of relief that can be provided. But when you have these discontinuities in environmental stability, there are thresholds. There are a series of thresholds, and each time a threshold is breached, the effects of these events expand to another level. If we take and look at an example like when Katrina happened and wiped out New Orleans, New Orleans is recovering. It's still recovering, but what we found in the aftermath of that was that, there was a lot of relief that came in from all over the country, right, that helped New Orleans recover. But the problem is, imagine an event that would be, say, an order of magnitude beyond the Katrina hurricane that struck New Orleans. Imagine that there were 10 major cities that went through that level of disruption and destruction. That would be 10 times harder to recover from than that single event of Katrina in, what was it, 2011? What year was Katrina?
2005.
Yeah, well, I'm where am I? 2005, right? Yes. So here's my point. What if you went two orders of magnitude beyond Katrina, and you're talking about 100 major cities that went through that level? Well, now you're talking about decades of recovery from that. Yeah. And now what if we're talking about 3 orders of magnitude? Well, 3 orders of magnitude, we're now looking at perhaps the extinction of modern civilization, not the extinction of human species. And here's the thing we've got to come to terms with. Events that could be considered 3 orders of magnitude more severe than Katrina are abundant through the history of the planet, even recent Earth history. So these are a real ongoing thing that happens and has happened literally hundreds of times. So we can't assume that, these kind of natural events aren't going to happen again. So this is why, I get frustrated, is because we need to be looking at that. If we're going to talk about climate change, we need to be talking about natural climate change. And we cannot be dismissive of it, because this is the record that we've got. This is the record that is coming up through all of the proxies and all of the measurements of past global changes, is that, yes, these things really do happen, and they happen with far more frequency than anybody had imagined a generation or two ago. But now, when we get back and we're talking about here the events at the Younger Dryas, we are talking about a civilization killer there. Now, what is the chances that something of that severity would happen again? Well, I would call that low probability. I would. It's possible, but it's a low probability, because we have to go back. If we're going to look at
lower,
what?
Lower, but it's
lower. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If we were go back in our record of global change, we have to go back at least 3 million years, maybe 5 million years, to find an event that was comparable in severity to the terminal Pleistocene mass extinction. Given that the number of species lost, you could almost think of that as a yardstick for habitat loss, right? Because when you destroy habitat, that's how you destroy species generally. Whether that habitat loss comes because of a more gradual climate change, which of course has the problem from extinction scenarios, is it gives species time to adapt. What we're looking at the terminal Pleistocene is very rapid climate change, very rapid and widespread habitat loss, and then widespread and rapid species loss. But what I'm getting at here is that in order to find something equivalent to that, we go back to an extinction event usually called the Hemphillian, which is dated around 5 million years ago. Now, my point is this: if we had an event today that was the level of the Younger Dryas, yeah, I think that would pretty much put us back in the Stone Age. The recovery from that, the global consequences of it were too widespread and too severe. And, you know, that would be the kind of, and two, if you go into a century of extreme bitter cold, you know, that's going to definitely cause widespread agricultural disruption and failure. And you're also going to have, you know, see, here's the thing. We've got an infrastructure in place now, and we can sustain outlying communities in the events of a disaster. But at some point, you're going to have the local survivors of a disaster are going to be completely preoccupied with their own survival, not helping the guy 200 miles away. You see, yeah. Their focus is going to be on their own survival. Now, my thought is that the chances of something as severe as the Younger Dryas happening in our lifetimes is low. Not out of the question, it's low. Could happen. But what is much higher in probability is the kind of thing that could literally cause severe stress to global civilization. I mean, because if you had, I mean, let's face it, in the aftermath of the Younger Dryas and that series of episodes, the human population was drastically reduced. Well, in a few minutes, I'll pull up a slide and show you how dramatically the evidence is for human population collapse in North America. But even a much lesser event than the Younger Dryas could cause mass mortality on a global scale and could cause the collapse of economic systems global that would take a century or more to recover from. So, I mean, and as we come down the spectrum, the hierarchy, yeah, we could completely miss a mass extinction event, that level event, but still suffer profound consequences to our global society and global economy that would put major stress on lots of people, if not ultimately, you know, death. You know, we're talking about, you know, hundreds of millions of people could die as a result of a shift much less severe than the Younger Dryas. That's the point, see? I mean, we're talking about events that would be as severe to our modern society as the bubonic plague was to the late Middle Ages.
That's what I was going to say. When you have the Little Ice Age, you have massive crop failures, then you have malnutrition, then you get plague, and everybody dies.
Yeah, that's pretty much the sequence that seems to pretty much fit the pattern now.
Right.
You have climate collapse, you have global cooling that causes crop failures. Crop failures lead to famine. Famine lead to people becoming weak and susceptible to opportunistic diseases, and then you have pestilence.
Yep.
And we see that pattern repeated at the onset of the Dark Ages between 536 and 542 AD, with the beginning of the Justinian plague, and when we see it repeated again with the onset of the bubonic plague in about, 1342, somewhere around right in there, that came right in the aftermath of the first climatic deterioration that signaled that, looks like the medieval warm period is over. And, you know, as we've talked about, that coincided with the rapid cessation of the great cathedral building enterprise, because the cathedrals were built during the medieval warm period when crops were abundant and people had a lot to eat. And, you know, when that came to an end, so did the cathedral building.
The strange thing to me about the Younger Dryas cataclysm, whatever it was, whether it was the onset or the end, is that you have these places like in Siberia where there's just a mass amount of mammoth bones under the tundra, right? There's all these remains concentrated. And then supposedly the human population was pretty high at that point too. But where are the mass amounts of bones of humans under tundra?
You, Kyle, are hitting upon what I consider to be one of the most interesting, unexplained questions about this whole phenomena. Is where are the abundant human remains? Where are the Clovis remains? And we're going to address that. But at this point, we know that they were there. We see their campsites. We see their villages, their migratory paths. We see their toolkits, their debitage mounds, all of that. They've left lots of evidence for their having existed all over unglaciated North America. Yet, where are they?
Where did they bury themselves? I mean, where did they inter their dead? It's weird that none of that stuff has been found. Even people that are fossilized, but you'd think that there would be, burial sites. I don't know.
And what is it? The Anzac site? Somebody mentioned it earlier.
Anzac.
Thank you. The Anzac site might be the only case of a Clovis specimen.
Right.
Yeah, and it's strange too. It's like there's two child remains there, and one of them is not Clovis.
It's 2,000 years younger than the Clovis skeleton. Anzac 2 is.
Mm-hmm. So it's
very weird.
Yeah,
it is weird. Yeah, I when Graham was writing America Before, we communicated somewhat on the Anzac site, and I was able to dig up a few things specifically on that for him. But, it's been, 2-3 years now, and I need to go back and review what the specifics were. But, yeah, it's bizarre. And then really, at the time, that was where I really began to confront this unanswered question of, well,
where are they?
Where are they? Right, exactly. Where are they?
Yeah. So also, I just looked this up. The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, Black Plague, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 75 to 200 million people in Eurasia between 1347 and 1351.
Okay, 1340. I said around 1342. I was kind of in the ballpark, but the conditions that led to it were already underway by 1342.
Well, think if we had to, in a modern day, if we had something that killed 200 million people.
Yeah.
That would be.
Well, that would be two-thirds the population of the U.S.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course we have drugs and things today and much better ways of treating that kind of stuff. But again, all of that depends upon the infrastructure being intact.
Yeah. And people elsewhere being able to help people who are under.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So, yeah. So here, we'll pull this up. This is a great slide here because it really helps to show, like, this is an example. This is Clovis Age Quarries. And here's 3 sites: Adams, Kentucky, Carson, Connecticut, Short, Tennessee, which is the name, I guess, of the primary discoverers of it. So you've got Kentucky, Tennessee, and South Carolina, which were all active quarries for about between 300 to 500 years that were being actively quarried. And you can see, like, the total number of artifacts over here on the left, right? So you've got a lot of artifacts, 1,000 artifacts that are found there in Kentucky. You've got 800 that are found in Tennessee, and almost 500 found at the Topper site in South Carolina. Then you get to 12,900 years ago, and then look what happens.
Yeah.
So here's the number of artifacts post-Clovis.
Yeah.
So here you had all of this activity going on right up to this threshold, and then boom, it's cut off. And so it's evidence like this that suggests that, humans were as much a victim of these great changes as the woolly mammoths and all the rest of the megafauna. And that, in fact, it was not the humans, and if the humans are struggling to survive and seeing their population numbers collapse, I don't think that they were going to be busy slaughtering 10 to 12 million mammoths worldwide.
Right. And humans are megafauna. We, in general, are over 100 pounds. So we count as mammals that are over 100 pounds, megafauna.
Yeah, we do. We count.
Same habitat. So.
Same habitat, right. Yeah, let's see, what's this one? So this is just the Topper quarry itself. And so notice what happens here. Here's the Younger Dryas Boundary, is represented by these red dots. And you can see that there was consistent occupation of this site for centuries, and then all of a sudden, down it goes post Clovis. But again, what does that again suggest? This is Oh, and this is from Malcolm LeCompte's paper, who we joined in the roundtable with to discuss the origin of the Carolina Bays a couple of years ago. And he was also the lead author of the great debunking of the debunkers that were Although Malcolm does not care for the theory of Tony Zamora, the ice boulder hypothesis.
Oh, yeah, he didn't like that one?
He doesn't like that one. Yeah, there's a number of issues with it, but I'm not taking any sides on that. I'm just waiting to see more evidence, and how the Carolina Bays may fit in with these events or not, as the case may be. I'm inclined to think that they do somehow, but the Carolina Bays are an unresolved question at this point. And
right.
Yeah, so but the Topper site is right out there in Carolina Bay country, and whatever the solution to Carolina Bays is, I think it's a very interesting question because they're a bizarre phenomena. And again, we'll put that down as on our list for upcoming topics to address.
That says there was a decline in core usage of greater than 99% that persisted for approximately 600 years. So it was 600 years before people showed back up and started quarrying it again and leaving artifacts.
Yes. That's exactly right. A decline in core usage greater than 99%.
That's interesting. There's like the story of the Tower of Babel, the biblical story. Like after the flood, it was like 600 years after that cataclysm before the people came out of the mountains and settled in the land of Shinar and started making bricks.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow, what a memory.
That's one of our favorite.
What a Bible scholar.
Strange ancient stories. Let us make bricks and bake them in the sun.
Takes 600 years for you to pick up,
Were you guys raised Catholic?
No.
Just Christian, not Catholic.
Christian, okay. Well, yeah, okay.
On and off Catholic.
Yeah, on and off, My mom's a devout Catholic now, but...
Oh, okay. So we're going to stop this share unless there's something else here we could pull up and quick look at. Let's see. Oh, Blackwater Draw. This is also from Malcolm's paper. Sampling site showing the Younger Dryas boundary layer is the dotted line right here. You don't see a black mat. You don't see the prominent black mat at Blackwater Draw like you do at Murray Springs and some of the others. But yeah, this is a great paper. I would bet that if people wanted to read it, I would not be surprised if you could find it on Google Scholar. But an independent evaluation of conflicting microspheral results from different investigations of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Okay, I got this from the supplementary information, but the article itself is a very good read. I would suggest, having these days, if you're reading, you've got your computer, you can look up any term and immediately find the definition of it. And that's one reason why I haven't been too concerned about defining every single term. I know I throw out a term, I just throw out the term taxonomic, right? I'm assuming that the people who are tuning into this are probably going to be capable enough to simply look something up online and find the definition. But, for years and years and years, when I was, in high school and the years after, I read stuff that was way beyond my pay grade at this time. And so I always kept one of these at hand.
Ah, yes.
And I used it constantly. And I don't know why it seems like people are forgetting how to use a dictionary, but I still use that. I still keep it. As you can see, I still have it right here because I like it. And look at what Brad has there. See, Brad is an old-fashioned scholar. We actually have written material. I know a lot of people, maybe younger ones, probably don't know what written material actually is, and if they've ever seen any.
You know what else you can do, Randall, to help those people? Lots of them have Alexa or Google, so you can just, whenever you want them to actually have a word looked up, just do it. Hey, Google, look up Taphonomy. And their phone sitting next to their computer when they're watching this will actually hear that and look the word up for them.
There we go. See?
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay up to speed, It's
true.
hard to sometimes focus on 20,000 years ago and then also focus on what's happening at the present. But
well, I definitely appreciate the vocabulary lesson
Yes.
of every episode.
Every episode,
So,
we learn new words.
really
it's
great.
great.
Well, yeah, and I've always thought it was fun to learn new words. I love learning new words.
Yep.
You know, I really do. And I used to keep vocabulary lists with definitions. And of course, as you learn new words, then you find yourself having to turn to the dictionary fewer and fewer times because you've got a ever expanding vocabulary.
Right.
So, yeah, and I think most of the people who are listening to this are happy to do that. They don't expect to just be spoon-fed every little thing. Yeah, okay, here's the topper site. Early Holocene, early Younger Dryas Boundary, shown by the dotted line, and you see the Clovis debitage. That's the debris that's left over from the flint napping and the tool making.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in fact, while you're sitting there, Kyle, why don't you pull up Google Scholar and put in this, and let's see if it's available for free download, because it may well be, and people could then download this, which is one of the most valuable and important papers written on this, because in the immediate aftermath of the first proposition that there had been a cosmic impact triggering the global changes at the Younger Dryas Boundary, there was a concerted effort to suppress this heretical idea, mostly amongst scientists who were invested in the idea of human overkill. That's an important link to make there. Many of the critics that early on attacked the idea of a possible impact being the trigger were also proponents of the human predation theory of mass extinction for whatever reason. And in some of the cases, I'm convinced that the reason was political more than anything else. But the point is that they made attacks that were then got a lot of press and attempted to prove that the proponents of an impact hypothesis were full of crap. But then Malcolm's paper comes out and basically debunks the debunkers and shows, for example, they went out and they took samples and they came back and said, well, we double tested. We did an independent test of the samples and we did not find the impact proxies there, right? So Malcolm and his team go out using their protocols and quickly realize that where they took the samples wasn't even in the right place. So clearly, if you've got a centimeter layer in which the proxies are deposited and preserved, and you don't sample that layer, no, you're not going to find the stuff, are you?
Right.
Right. And so in this paper, he systematically goes through and deconstructs the criticisms of the objectors, and that's why this paper is so great.
You finding it?
Go to Google Scholar there, Kyle.
Conflicting microspheral results from different investigations of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
That's the one, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
That's right.
Does it give a link to a PDF? Oh, you're just looking at on your phone?
Yeah, so he looked it up on Google Scholar, and it is there.
There it is, PDF.
It's there. All right, folks. You can go on, and for free, you can download this paper, print it out however you want to read it. And I know it's going to be technical, but as you read through it, if you've got questions, I can't necessarily explain every detail in the paper, but I have a pretty good working knowledge of most of what it's discussing in there, and so we could then make that.
We'll put a link to the PDF download in the show notes.
Perfect.
It's only 10 pages of 1-point font.
But yeah, it's a great, a very important paper. Which I highly, highly recommend. So I'm going to jump back here and...
Better write that one down, Brad.
I'm getting it.
This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.